onto the impending economic doom that we're going to be facing. Every month of the
Now,
Trump administration, we have seen fewer and fewer jobs created. We've seen striking job losses in virtually every field. This is, of course, part of his tariff agenda and his lack of a domestic economic policy agenda as well. A couple months ago, Trump fired the director of the BLS for reporting statistics that were woke and gay and non-binary and didn't follow the Trump agenda. Well, guess what, pal? It's not that the BLS is woke and gay. It's that your policy agenda is terrible. We are still losing jobs, or we're creating jobs at a rate significantly below what was expected.
to the economy and a jobs report the White House called disappointing. Here's why. A paltry
Who did that?
22,000 non-farm jobs added below the 75,000 forecast by leading economists. Unemployment ticked up to 4.3%. More troubling, the 3-month average for monthly job creation, 29,000. It was 82,000 during the same period last year. One thing worth noting, however, the president did not label today's downbeat numbers politically manipulated, an evidence-free accusation he hurled when last month's data also disappointed on the downside. For more on the jobs report, state of the U.S. economy, we turn to Jolene Kent. Or I look straight ahead to Jolene Kent. Jolene, what jumps out at you?
You know, there's good, bad, and the ugly when it comes to this jobs report. And when you look at the revisions, looking back over the summer, for example, when President Trump got so riled up about the jobs report, we saw that June number actually go negative 13,000. So that means 13,000 jobs were actually lost. The good news is for July, the numbers were revised up a little. But as for August, when you go beyond the headline number, where were the gains? This jobs report was essentially held up by social services and healthcare jobs. Where we saw the biggest losses were areas that are often impacted by tariffs and by an uncertain economy. We're talking about, government jobs, no surprise there with DOGE involved, manufacturing, mining, and wholesale trade. Those also experience losses. But what you really see, and you probably already feel this in the economy major, is that firms are just holding steady. They're holding on. People are holding on to their jobs. They're hugging them, right? And they're not moving right now because there's so much uncertainty in the economy. So you can imagine all those small business owners that we constantly bring you on this show. They say they can't afford to move very much when it comes to hiring or even hanging on to people that they already have because they don't know where tariffs are going to go. They don't know what it's going to be like if they can meet their bottom line towards the end of the year. So that's
There are two things I want to interject with here. The first being that this is one of the first times I can remember where there were more unemployed people than job openings. People are like, oh, isn't this how it always is? And I'm like, probably not if it's being fucking reported on. There is also, of course, the fact that ghost jobs exist. So this has probably been perpetual for at least the last couple of years. Big firms, big corporations, they post these bullshit job openings on Indeed to give the illusion of growth. And then all of these people apply and they just seemingly never get hired. Additionally, when it comes to the tariffs, even though these tariffs have been struck down, they don't go into effect. One of the reasons why they're so damaging is for what this reporter said, in the fact that businesses don't know what the future is going to be like because of these tariffs. I have some inside baseball here. There are people who I know who work in sales positions, they work in operations positions at their job, and they are constantly dealing with these fucking tariff changes. Every time Donald Trump updates his tariffs on fucking China or on Sri Lanka or India or whatever the fuck, these people have to go and calculate this into their cost sheets, and they have to present these to their managers like, oh, this previously 20% margin on this one product is now 10% on this other product. And then depending on if they go direct to consumer, if they go direct to business, that impacts negotiations with the vendors as well. There is just so much unnecessary uncertainty surrounding these tariffs. If companies don't know how much money they're going to make, they are going to freeze hiring. They are going to freeze potential bonuses and raises for the people that are already at those jobs. And they just overall don't they don't have the capacity to look long term. Not that these publicly traded companies give a fuck about any of that. I'm more so talking about smaller businesses. It just fucks up the entire it just fucks up the entire business plan of these companies. Additionally, and unfortunately, some people wind up getting laid off. We saw someone who was interviewed by one of the media networks, owned a solar panel manufacturing plant in Pennsylvania, and he had to potentially lay off 50% of his workforce, not just because of tariffs, but also because of Trump's pro-climate change agenda. These have real-world implications. Even though tariffs, it's macroeconomic bullshit. It's not necessarily something that impacts people in their everyday lives quite yet, but there are consequences to this. Furthermore, these companies, these big, these big retailers, these big corporations, they are increasing the prices of their goods and services, despite the fact that these tariffs are not technically legally binding. They're doing so due to all of the hysteria. They have a reason to raise prices because the consumers are expecting it.
To 9 months.
And they should expect it because things are going to get more expensive. But these companies don't have to raise prices. They're just doing so because they fucking can.
Prediction for how tariffs, for example, might impact the economy. We're starting to see that play out right now with this week jobs report.
Julian, some of the hot takes I saw right after this report surfaced from financial analysts was this guarantees, from their perspective, a September rate cut by the Fed and possibly encourages the Fed to think more seriously about an October rate cut.
Yes, so you basically got a big old green light when it comes to whether or not the Federal Reserve should cut interest rates in September. And now, instead of maybe just a quarter point cut, you might also expect to see what we call a jumbo cut, maybe half a point when it comes to that benchmark rate. But overall, yes, you could see the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell always saying he's looking at the data. And so when you look at the labor market and you look at inflation, especially PCE that came in earlier this month, and also the consumer prices, which we're going to get next week, you could see multiple rate cuts going into the end of this year, which would be great for small businesses who want to invest more in their businesses and borrow money at a cheaper rate. Credit cards, obviously, car loans, and of course, mortgages. It would be good news on that front. But a lot of people sitting on the sidelines, including employers, and that's showing up today in the data.
None of this shit matters for like 90% of people. I'm not anti-rate cut. I understand that the Federal Reserve has to do stuff like this sometimes. The reason why I'm anti-rate cut in this specific instance is because the rate cut, in conjunction with Trump's tariff policy, would lead to an even more inflated cost of living. Prices would go up. The reason why they would go up is because decreasing the rate reduces the value of the US dollar, which means that there are fewer imports that companies can bring in because the dollar is weaker. It doesn't go as far anymore, so they have to reduce the amount of inventory that they're bringing in. For mortgages, I guess it's great, but as someone with a mortgage, a half a point rate cut is not going to fucking do anything seismic. If you want mortgages to be more affordable, you're looking at like a single point or a double point or a triple point cut, bringing the interest rate from like 7% to 4%, which effectively halves your mortgage payment. Additionally, we're getting off topic here. That would make it even more difficult to buy a house because now you have more people entering the housing market during a time when there just isn't enough fucking housing for everybody to go around. And also during a time when the list prices for these homes are incredibly high. They're extraordinarily high. Jerome Powell understands that he's pretty much in a no-win situation. If he doesn't cut the rates, Donald Trump is going to continue to make fun of him on social media. But if he does cut the rates, he's going to make everything more expensive for the everyday consumer. I'm reiterating, cutting rates is something that I'm not inherently against. But this, much like every other political decision, requires the context of the current situation.
Jolene Kent, as always, thank you very much. I want to turn now to Justin Wolfers. He joins me. He's an economics professor at the University of Michigan. He is also brilliant and witty. Justin, I'm always delighted to talk to you. Give me your top line on what the country should take away from the jobs report today.
Time to get Botox. What do I mean by that? There's going to be all sorts of worry lines across my forehead for the rest of the next few months, mate. There's no question that the economy is slowing, and it's slowed quite dramatically. The real question is if that trajectory continues, because if it continues to slow further, We're getting close to recession territory. We're not there yet. Reading these signals is all the more difficult because we have a mass immigration purge and a slowdown in immigration and population growth right now. But it's time to pay a little attention, and if you're paying attention, to be a little worried.
Justin, I'm
I'm
glad you
glad someone's saying it. So many people come on these mainstream media networks and they're like, oh no, the jobs report is fine, but like, you really shouldn't be worried about anything. Every sign is tracking to economic collapse. It's not just the jobs report. The cost of energy is twice as much as the consumer price index, which means that people are paying twice as much to fucking keep their lights on than they were whenever the last data point was. It is more expensive for them to keep their house on. It is outpacing the cost of inflation 2 times. There's also the fact that Las Vegas tourism is down considerably, which is an indicator of a potential recession. This is what happened in 2008. And I believe the unemployment numbers are similar to where they were in 2008 as well. So at least this Australian guy is like, listen, mate, things are not looking peachy up here in the United States. I'm not saying that it's going to be an absolute economic collapse, but we are approaching that point rapidly.
mentioned the immigration component because one of the things the White House noted on the upside today is they believe jobs created, though not as robust as they would prefer, are going to Native Americans, and that foreign-born workers are sort of being, in their words, wrung out of the new jobs economy. How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, it's not happening. What's happening is actually a fairly simplistic misreading of how these statistics are compiled by those in the White House.
Okay, bro.
Look, here's the problem. When there's a big immigration crackdown and the federal government surveyors knock at your door and you're an immigrant, you might be less likely to answer the door. As a result, we're getting fewer responses from immigrants, and as a result, it ends up looking like immigrant employment is down, or natural-born employment is up. So it's a
Another thing with the mass deportations is they are largely targeting Latino workers. They are largely targeting Hispanics, people who work some of the most necessary jobs in the country, people who work in agriculture, in manufacturing, in the service industry. The idea that native, quote unquote, Native Americans are taking these jobs afterwards is farcical. The reason why these individuals are taking those jobs is because they are desperate. They are desperate. And the business owners in those respective industries are taking advantage of them, particularly when they're undocumented in, farms, for example, working for potentially below the minimum wage, because they aren't documented. So therefore they have no fucking rights. Natural born American citizens are simply not taking those jobs.
Reading of the data. It's also not something that gives me any particular joy. There's no American who I want to see do better or worse. I want to see all of them thrive.
The White House also pointed to 2 other underlying statistics. They said capital investment rose by 8%. They believe that suggests future job growth, reindustrialization, onshoring of America, and wage growth, not spectacular, but 1.4% so far this year. Evaluate those 2.
Yeah, so this report had no data on capital investment, but if this capital investment is about rebuilding American manufacturing, which apparently is what much of this tariff pain is about, manufacturing employment fell for the 6th month in a row. Whatever it is that we're doing, it's not working. There's a logic to that. The first page of the tariff handbook says if what you want to do is try and get jobs onshore, don't put tariffs on inputs.
Yo,
immediately
why
the
is
president
this guy stealing my commentary? I can't do anything. He's verbatim saying everything that I'm going to say. Donald Trump's going to see this and call him a woke Australian Marxist. I didn't even know that Karl Marx knew what Australia was. You're telling me that they have Das Kapital in the land down under? Yeah, he's cooking. He's right. He's right. Also, if you believe that capital investment implies anything positive for the working class, you are naive. Capital investment means that they are investing in the shareholders. They are investing in stock buybacks. They're not building any fucking factories here. They're not building plants. They're giving Mark Zuckerberg another fucking private jet.
Tariffs on steel and aluminium. There's very, very few Americans who work in steel. So it saves very, very few jobs. But there are enormous numbers, hundreds of thousands, who work in jobs that use steel as an input. Their foreign rivals, their competitors, can make cars without having to pay an extra upcharge for the steel. Americans cannot. So these tariffs are actually undermining the competitiveness of American workers and American companies through manufacturing.
He's right. Donald Trump was so, bricked up over the idea of rebuilding American manufacturing. He would not have tariffed anybody. He would have instead signed legislation that invested in all of the industries that he wanted to revitalize. You could go back, look at what we manufactured in the 50s and 60s, and literally just go down the list and add that shit into the bill. Multiple billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, even like $1 trillion in domestic manufacturing. I know that's a lot, and it's fiscally irresponsible. You can fiscally suck both of my fucking nuts. In the long term, that is better for the country. Not being so reliant on China and India and fucking Vietnam and Mexico and Canada is better. You bring jobs back to this country, high-paying union jobs. Hopefully, you're able to manufacture things in this country, therefore driving down the cost of goods. And then we don't have to worry about this fucking tariff nonsense.
I also heard someone say today that the biggest tax in America right now is an uncertainty tax. Uncertainty about tariffs, uncertainty about the duration and toothiness, if you will, of immigration crackdowns, uncertainty in the regulatory space. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with it. There's actually something good that comes from a tariff. The painful part is you give up money. The good part is the government gets money and can build roads. The uncertainty tax is
building roads. You could tell this, like, I know he lives in the U.S. He teaches at the University of Michigan, but this is just a really lucid point that he's making. Just by mentioning this, lets you know the thought process of media people, or he's not really a media person, but just like certain academics and media people who understand like economics, talking about these kinds of things, and just like the regular ass person that goes on CBS or ABC. None of them would talk about building a road, which is like a fundamental principle of a fucking society. Yeah, tariffs are good for bringing a little bit of extra revenue into the government, of helping, add a couple billion tax dollars so that way you can rebuild bridges in Pennsylvania. But no one in the American media class, in the American capital holding class, wants to fucking do that. The government, the Trump administration, wants to take all of this tariff money and build a fucking ballroom in the White House.
Painful, but we get nothing back for it. It doesn't need to be this way. So think about the whole tariff telenovela that we're all living through. We had Liberation Day on April 2nd. It was all undone on April 9. We were told 90 deals in 90 days. 90 days are up. There were no deals, so they gave themselves a 24-day extension. At the end of that extension, they announced a set of tariffs that looked like what we started with, the Liberation Day tariffs. So they've now been in effect a mere couple of weeks, but the Federal Appeals Court just ruled them unconstitutional. And so now that 10 years after coming down the golden escalator, Trump finally has his tariff policy, we're now just a couple of weeks away from potentially the Supreme Court ruling the whole thing unconstitutional. It's impossible to do business under circumstances like this. There are serious debates about whether tariffs could be good or bad, but incompetence, incoherence, illegality, that doesn't help anyone.
Julian Kent talked to us a moment ago, Justin, about Americans hugging their jobs. I've heard a phrase, no hire, no fire, meaning those who have employees are keeping them, but they are not expanding, and they're not yet, because it's not a true recession, laying people off. Walk my audience through that dynamic.
I think Jolene got this exactly right. Look, what do you do when your business is threatened by a set of tariffs that look like they might be enormous, but also might be ruled unconstitutional in a couple of weeks' time? For instance, let me tell you, I'm just going to be, tell you my story. I've wanted to buy a second car, a family car, to get around Michigan. My kids need to get around, and I'm trying to figure out when to do it. I don't want to pay the extra tariff if it's going to be off again the next day. And even though I'm an economist and I study this for a living, I've been frozen in place. I just don't know what to do next. And so think about employers as being in a similar situation, which is, boy, I can't be confident that whatever opportunities are coming up are going to persist. So therefore, I can't expand. And I also can't be confident that whatever threats I'm facing right now are going to persist. So I think it would be a little foolish, perhaps even selfish, to let go of people just based on my fears right now. I see an American economy that's very much frozen in place.
He calls me mate. My trainer calls me mate. I respect them both. Justin Wolfers, always great to have you. Please.
Closing out on that, the discretionary spending that Americans engage in is most telling of it's most telling of a recession. Like, it is a recession indicator. When people are not spending money on fun things, it's bad for the economy. It's bad for the economy. People are going to buy gas. They're going to buy groceries because they fucking have to. But if they're not buying all of that frilly stuff, it's not good. It's not good. I saw a report that said consumer spending was slowing down during the holiday season, which is typically when people spend the most money. Additionally, it's September, August. That's typically when all the big box retailers get in the Christmas shipments, or they're like facilitating the import of the Christmas, of like the holiday season goods. It's just really, it's looking really bleak right now. I'm not trying to be pessimistic. This is unfortunately just the reality that we're existing in right now. The economic uncertainty does not bode well for anybody. In the beginning, we at least had the conspiracy theory that Donald Trump was tanking the stock market to make all of his friends wealthier. But now the stock market just doesn't react in the same capacity. They recognize the instability that Donald Trump brings as a political figure.